All right, so we'll go ahead and start recording. If you're just joining us, welcome again to First Draft to Final Proofs of What True Writers Club. This event was made possible through funding from the Dexter donation. Before I introduce our panelists, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of you who participated in National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo. Raise your hand if you participated. Got a couple people here, two online. If you're just joining us, come on in. So let's give everyone a round of applause for that achievement. Congratulations. All right, so you're likely coming here with a manuscript finished or in draft, wondering, what's next? How do I even begin to revise? At what point do I query an agent? What does the publishing world even look like right now? And that's why we're here today. We thought, who better to answer these questions than 3 local authors who all published a novel recently in the past year. Okay, so I'm sad to share that one of our scheduled panelists, Riss Nielsen, couldn't make it today. We are sending her and her family healing thoughts, and we're thrilled that local author Rachel Menard could be here. I did want to share a little bit about Riss's work before introducing the panelists with us today. You can take a look at her debut young adult novel right in front of me here, Deep in Providence, which was a 2022 finalist for the New England Book Awards, and her forthcoming novel, I'm Not Supposed to Be in the Dark, is set to publish in 2023. So if you're local, look for Riss's work and other events that she might be a part of. And all of these local authors, their books are available at local bookstores. We'll get links in the chat. We have copies here for you guys to look at, and then hopefully purchase at your favorite indie. Okay, I'm going to introduce our guests, and then one by one, they'll share from their experience bringing their novel from first draft to the finished product. So after our panelists share, we'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So if you have any as they're talking, drop them down. There'll be time to ask at the end. All right, I'm just going in alpha order, and I guess just like down the road. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Annie Hartnett, on my far right, is the author of novels Rabbit Cake from Tin House and Unlikely Animals from Random House. She's received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Sewanee Writers Conference, and the Associates of the Boston Public Library. She wrote much of the first draft of Unlikely Animals at What's Your Writers Club. She lives in Lakeville, Massachusetts with her husband, daughter, and darling border collie. So Annie, if you would start us off just by sharing a little bit, kind of an overview of your process from first draft to final proofs.
Do I need that? Do I need this or?
How's this sound?
Good. I do need
Yeah.
it. That would be great. Okay. I will use it. Hi everybody. Hi people online. Thanks for having me. What year? It's been it's great to be back here. I wrote a lot of Unlikely at that table where the computers. So Unlikely Animals is my second book. So probably more useful for me to talk about my first book. Since that is, I know a lot of people, if you're writing the first draft, are thinking about agents, and so those choices I didn't have to make with Unlikely because I already had an agent. I stayed with my agent. But I guess I'll probably talk about both and how they were different. And that's one thing that sucks is every book, like the first draft is, it's not like you write one book and then you know how it works and you just do the thing again. Apparently you have to read, like every book has its own rules and you have to learn it all again. So I'm back in that with the third book. It's the part I don't like. I hate the first draft. So if you're out of the first draft, like congratulations, welcome to the other side. It gets a little more fun from here. So I finished the first draft, and what I will do, the first thing I do, and I do this hundreds of times, is I can't recommend enough having some kind of e-reader, whether it's a Kindle or it's an iPad. What I do is I have a Kindle. I don't really read any other books. On my Kindle, I just read my own books. So I have a Kindle, and the great thing about a Kindle is that you can, and because it's an iPad too, but send it right to, like, now you can do PDF and doc. We used to have, when I was writing Rabbit Cake, it's annoying, you have to convert it, but now you just email it to yourself, shows up, and it's way different for me than if I were to print it out or get it printed at Staples, which I've done before, but it just feels like I'm reading someone else's book. It just makes me, it more replicates the feeling of reading someone else's book, which is so important because you're trying to see, like, okay, where are the problems if I were someone else reading this, not myself. So it really creates just a new point of view on the book. And so the first thing I'll do after I finish the draft is I read it all the way through. And I don't really, I'm not a big note taker in general. I do have, like, I do take notes on my phone, but not like, I don't have a notebook or anything. I just, kind of read it through, see what it feels like, and then I'll read it through again. And that's when I will start thinking, okay, what are the big problems? Like, so that's why I wouldn't be taking notes at this point, is just because I'm just feeling like, okay, what are the big major problems? And then I will do a draft that's, with Unlikely Animals, so much of that book, I wanted to get the plot right. My first book was like a really voice-driven first person. Like, all that mattered is that you love that character. And so the plot was really flexible. I could do a lot of different things, and that book did have many plots. This book, I needed to get the plot right, but then some of the character development, there's a lot of characters in this book. Some of the character development was weaker. And so I did like a character development draft, like, and just would be, and like, I would call the document character development draft. Or I had like my agent always wants me to go, like, she wants me to make people cry. My interest is to make people laugh. So I will, like, the first draft was full of like all the jokes I can make. And then she will be like, okay, well, we need a little emotion here. And so I had like an emo draft. And so I had like many emo drafts, because that's something I knew was a weakness of mine, that I have to like mind myself for like when the character is actually going through some like emotional transformation, like where are those? And at that point I'll watch a lot of movies. Like, Unlikely, sorry, I have something in my throat that is hard to talk over. Sorry. I hope.
How's our guys speak up, because they're just having trouble.
Oh, they can't hear. Okay. Yeah, I hope that's better. I think the thing in my throat also was preventing her from talking to that. So I will do that until I'm happy with the book. So that can be like, I will read a draft hundreds of times, but I won't do it all the way through. I will think it's perfect. I always think it's perfect. When I finish, and then I send it to myself again, and then I'll read until I find a big problem, and then we'll fix it. And then I can stop and fix it. So that's my basic editing process. I will also at that point do some outlining. I don't outline during the first draft. I will do outlines at that point. And then I know people want to hear about the agent process, and we can talk about this during question time too, but with Rabbit Cake, I queried too early. So, I just told you, when I finish something, I think it's perfect. That is definitely a personality flaw. So I finished Rabbit Cake, and immediately in a first draft, like I really finished, and then, that's not completely fair. What happened was I was in an MFA program. I wrote the thesis that then had been workshopped and really, worked over, which was 40,000 words. And then I graduated, and then spent that summer. I Googled how long is a novel, and came up with 80,000 words is what I was shooting for. So I wrote 80,000 words, and over that summer, and then I started querying agents in August and got back a round of nice feedback, but it was all revised and resubmit because they were like, you know, this, what happened on page 69 is just like so crazy and no one should do that in a novel. And like, why did you, and which someone would have fixed for me if I had done what you should do is show it to a bunch of your friends. I didn't do that. I was like, you know, it's perfect. Send it to the presses. And I was also just so scared to show it to people. Like it seemed less scary to send it to an agent than it seemed to show it to like a friend who, you know, would have read, like I do have friends who are big readers and who would have read it for me, but I was too scared to ask them. I asked my mother and she didn't read the whole thing. So like, that's the worst case scenario, right? So I got feedback. I was very lucky to get feedback, to get that personalized feedback, because that's pretty rare. Like don't send it to agents thinking that they're going to give you feedback, because most of the time they don't have the time to do that, because they should be focusing on, you know, selling their clients' books and editing their clients. So sometimes you'll get feedback. I was just super lucky that that happened, because then I was able to say, okay, I really just needs an overhaul and I'm gonna edit it and I'm gonna fix that thing that no novel should ever do. And at that point I also worked in a bookstore, so I read a lot of books at that time. I find that reading books during that editing process really helps, even more than a first draft, because you really see, you know, structurally how people are making choices, and that's where I get a lot of my ideas, is just reading other people's stuff. So then I queried agents. The only time people always ask, like, when, you know, should you not query agents during the summer? That actually, from what I've heard, is often fine. The only time you do not ever query agents is when I query agents, which is December. But it worked out because I did get like some, you know, some bites, but my agent was, you know, she had cleared her desk and she was just in the office alone, like, you know, waiting to go to a Christmas party, and she ended up looking through queries and was like, what's this? And so and then she offered from her, like, you know, she was at her parents' house and she also had the flu, and so she was calling me on like Christmas Eve, and so I felt really wanted. So it all worked out, but it was just that's not how you should do it, because then I did have to go back to the other agents that were interested and say, like, hope you're having a nice holiday. Could you read my book? Because I'm trying to make a decision here. And they were like, you know, screw you. So that's not the position you want to get into. So learn from me. And then I have a very editorial agent, so she edits a lot with me. And so we edited for definitely over a year. And she, yeah, back and forth, lots of editing. And then finally we got a publisher who was like the perfect publisher for Rabbit Cake. And then we edited not like an insane amount, like she knew exactly what to do with that book, which was good. So we did 2 rounds, I think. This was in, you know, the book came out in 2017. So, and so that was pretty much the Rabbit Cake process, my first book process, agenting, editor, and then this book was different because I sold it in March 2020 and started, you know, I sold it in February 2020 and started editing in March 2020. And I was like, how do I, you know, I didn't have childcare anymore and had to like also just figure out how do I write a funny book about death when 2020. So, you know, there's also going to be stuff that life throws at you that you're going to have to figure out. So that was a different process, but yeah. So I think Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie. I think our mic died. Oh no. We'll talk. We will project.
Yeah.
Did they hear it now?
They can hear.
Okay, good.
All right. You were doing great. Sorry.
Thank you, Annie. It's great to hear about your process, mistakes and all, because we can learn from those. Thanks for being willing to share. And yeah, I can't imagine doing that process during the pandemic too. So congratulations. Thank you. I want to introduce Courtney Denelle, the author of It's Not Nothing, a novel in fragments drawn from her experience of homelessness and recovery. She's been awarded residencies from Hedgebrook and the Denelle Foundation and received her greater education from the public library. She lives in Providence. You can find her online at courtneydenelle.com and at Instagram at courtneydenelle. Get links for those of you online and chat with her book as well. Courtney, do you want to share a little bit about the process of this book?
It's really hard for me to talk about this book without talking about the process of making it. And it was really very much made, like written and then assembled. I would say primarily because I thought I was writing a short fiction collection. I thought I was writing a linked flash collection, if that's a thing. And it turned out I wasn't. And but that process of realizing it was slow and then all at once. I had the kind of lightning strike moment of realizing that everything on my desktop, I'm a real type B person, everything, all of the saved files, all like the snatches of dialogue, the jokes, the one-liners, all of it was already there. It wasn't an aspect of something that I needed to write. It was pieces of a greater thing. And then everything after that really took on a creating energy. I had that, I always thought it was like hippie nonsense, but like I had that experience of getting out of my own way, as they say. And I really felt it, and it all culminated with the residency that I was tremendously grateful and kind of honored to have been awarded. I wound up going to Hedgebrook, which is really amazing residency for women writers off the coast of Seattle. And I was there for 3 weeks, and I wound up finishing my work while I was there. By that point, because I think short fiction, or at least the way that I kind of approach short fiction, is so rigorous, is so tight on the sentence level, things had been pretty revised at that. I showed up with like a toolbox full of knives, like everything was really sharp. And so it was, in that final revision, it was really assembling things, almost like a mosaic, and writing into it, connecting pieces that maybe were a little like incongruous is one thing, but like whiplash is another thing entirely. There was a lot of whiplash on the page. So because I didn't have, I didn't go to college, I didn't have like a writer community, I was basically doing this almost as a manifestation of like outsider art. The work that I was making, the work that I was creating on the page was a direct extension of my mental health, my recovery, and my therapy. This is true. It wasn't like I was, sharing my journal with the world, but it was very much an extension of my own path of recovery. And so I had been working it out myself. I never had a first reader. And so, but like Annie, though, it was in reading the work of others, reading the work of brilliant people, and also people who maybe you're like, oh, they really missed an opportunity there. I really was able to kind of guide myself across the finish line. The process of like reading it aloud, recording it, listening to it back, cutting all the flab. Anytime I heard myself like running out of breath and the recitation, like cut, like brutally, like red pen, loved it. Having said that, though, that meant that the book that I took out was very, very close to the book that got published. I got a Christmas Eve phone call too. Like I did the wrong thing too, but I didn't wind up querying. I was ready to query, but then a friend who I had met at Hedgebrook introduced me to somebody through referral. And I just, like, the first week of December, I just sent her my whole manuscript, and she called me on Christmas. He was like, thanks, Santa. She was really psyched. She thought it was like good to go, and we wound up taking it out like 2 months later. All this is to say that that was very atypical and really fast. And so, but having said that though, I was ready to query until my friend Sue had introduced me to my agent. I had a list of who I wanted to query first, like first round. I was submitting short fiction by then, so I was like deeply versed in rejection. I was ready to go. I felt like my skin had really built up. And it just wound up not shaking out that way, weirdly enough. But I figured out the agents that I wanted to query by looking in the acknowledgements of the most recent publications that was really like doing it for me. Like not like identical work, but people that are like, if you imagine your book as a person in the high school cafeteria, like they'd totally be sitting at the same table together. Those were the kind of authors and I was like, okay, that's an agent I might query, that's an agent I might query. But again, it just didn't really like work out like that. Because the work is like particular, it's in fragments. I didn't have an editor at my imprint. I had a proofreader, and that was it. And truth be told, if I'm going to be totally frank, that was like an issue for me. I actually thought, I had this fear that it was like a red flag. I'm like, you think this thing is good to go, like pump the brakes, you know? And I still don't know if that's a right thing or a wrong thing. I think people might have opinions on, you know, both sides, but it did force me to really look into my work in a way that I hadn't to date. And also it had been sitting in the drawer, so to speak, for a while by then. So I was approaching it with kind of fresh eyes. But I think like, I don't know, if someone was telling my story to me and they said that your imprint was like, you don't need a developmental editor, you're good to go, I would tell them, I don't know about that. That is concerning. But then some other people told me that was like a testament to like how tight the work was. It's probably all of that, but regardless, here we are. I'm digressing now.
It
I'm
feels
kind
like
of digressing.
you're up there for a long time, that's what I was like, okay.
So she was-
No, you're
Okay. So I didn't have, I mean, it could have been because I kind of put myself through the ringer to date, you know, that I didn't really have that that much of a rigorous revision after I sold my book. But having just finished my second book, which I wrote on purpose, not, I didn't accidentally write a novel. I didn't think I was writing a short fiction collection. I set out to write work deliberately. I have been putting it through the whole once over that like Annie was describing. I wound up writing just this angry first draft that read like an angry Vanity Fair article kind of. It was just, but I went through from beginning to end. I was like, we're just gonna keep going. We're just gonna keep going. And then I sent it to myself and read it on my iPad. I printed it and was editing it on the page, which is always my preference. And I've thought I've finished it 3 times. I have finished it now, or at least I've taken it as far as I can. And now my agent's going to be taking it out in the new year. And but yeah, there was like 3 or 4 times where I didn't think it was perfect, but I definitely thought it was done. I was like, yeah, like high five and like a million angels or whatever. So it is a little bit different. I expect that my third book that I'm just starting right now, my third novel, is going to be completely different too, because each one is kind of like begetting the next. I'm gonna stop there. I could keep going. I apologize.
No,
Okay.
no, don't apologize. Thank you so much for all that you shared. I think it's so helpful to hear from various authors because the process can look so different from Annie's emo drafts to Courtney's, I don't know what you say, revision as mosaic, kind of putting together that can look so different. And then there's a lot of overlaps I'm hearing too that are really helpful to kind of guide us through it. Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce Rachel next up. Thank you so much for being here, Rachel. Rachel Menard is an author of strange and fantastical stories for teens. Her short work has been featured in Writer's Digest and on Past Wonders. Game of Strength and Storm, her debut novel, was a 2022 Gold Standard Junior Library Guild selection. Clash of Fate and Fury, the second book of the Labors of Jen series, is forthcoming from books in 2023. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Rachel, do you want to tell us a little bit about your process going from that first draft?
First, thanks for being here. Hello, people online. And let's send well wishes to Riss and her family. You should definitely check out her book. It's set in Providence. I read it and loved it. So if Riss, you're watching, I did give you a shout out. So part revision, I always say my books are proof that you can polish a turd. And I've done it many times. My first drafts are not great. I don't know if you know what like pantser and plotter are. Does everyone know what that is? Online, if you don't, they say like you're either a pantser or a plotter. A pantser writer just sits down and free writes and sees what comes out of it. A plotter is someone who heavily outlines and follows that strict outline. I'm in between. I call myself a plantster. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, I read a lot of genre fiction, so I definitely have to do a lot of pre-figuring of the world, the magic systems. I think about my characters, the basic plot, and I have all that kind of figured out before I sit down to write. But I do also like to leave myself a lot of room in case, something comes up and it doesn't, fit with my prescribed notion. So I leave room for that to change. Or sometimes with fantasy too, you'll realize like this magic isn't gonna work. It's got questions. I'm gonna talk about a famous book where I felt like so Harry Potter, I feel like some of their magic systems were like lacking in some rules. So me as a writer, I like to have strict rules. So I have all that set when I sit down. And then my first draft is sort of me exploring everything else. I get the basic character arc, plot arc. Most of the problems with my magic system are figured out. There's probably a few holes. And then like Annie, my first read through is like a really big overarching, like, what are the problems here? If this is your first nano novel and you've never edited before, it can be hard to figure out what's wrong, but just look for any part as you're reading through that doesn't feel right. It's boring, it's slow, you're losing interest. Those are good places to focus in on. So I find when I find those spots, it's usually one or two problems. Either my character is lacking in either likability or motivation. She's just, you don't want to spend time with her. Or the plot isn't moving forward, or it's just not enough. It's not interesting. My character's interesting, but what she's doing isn't interesting and it feels unnecessary. If it's the character, a lot of times you have to go back to the beginning and you have to see if she needs more backstory or, some sort of, if her goals aren't clear enough, it's always kind of a strong indicator that you need to fix something. But if your character's fine, I always say, you need to look at plot and what's happening. It might not be enough. So for Game of Strength and Storm, it's a gender-bent Hercules retelling. And the first draft, I stuck straight to the Hercules story. If you're not familiar with the Hercules story, he had been driven mad by Hera to kill his whole family. And then when he came to his senses, he needed to redeem himself as a hero. So he was tasked with doing the 10 labors by King Eurystheus to kind of redeem himself. So my first draft, I had my character Jen. Her father has gone to prison and she's trying to redeem their reputation for what he's done. And I had her just going around like killing lions and catching boars and, you know, I'm like, geez, this is really boring. Like, maybe it worked in ancient Greece, but I have to compete with Marvel now, so I need to do something different. It was at a point I'm like, I'm just gonna like deviate from the story. I need to just not go straight. And how am I gonna shake this up? So I added in, she's on there, Caster. I put in a competitor. So then it became a race and I set a deadline and I added her as a second narrator. And so Jen didn't have to carry the plot all on her own. I had two stories. I had Caster's wants for finishing these labors and Jen's wants for finishing these labors. And they were competing with each other. So that was my second draft. And in it, I was like, this still isn't enough. It wasn't exciting enough. For genre fiction, it's important that it needs to move. So I added in a love interest. So Caster's twin brother became like Jen's love interest to kind of, you know, boost up that drama too. And he became a third narrator. And that was the draft that was kind of my first, okay, now I can work with this. Second revision is looking for plot holes. Again, slow spots. If there's slow spots, a lot of times I see if I can take something from exposition and make it dialogue. That'll speed up a scene really quickly. Opposing, if it's moving too fast, I need to put in exposition. Because I'm a plot writer and a character writer, I always have to add words and I always have to add descriptions. Some people are opposite and they write very beautifully and then they have to add in more action, but I have to add in like, how does the world look? I keep a Pinterest board for that and just practice on like, here's this Pinterest room and I'm going to describe everything in it. That helps me a lot with description if anyone else has trouble with that. My third pass is kind of a copy edit revision. I just like tighten everything up. Some people would send it to beta readers prior to this point, but I don't like everyone to think I'm a hack. So I get it in like the best plot I can get and then send it off. It's usually also when I'm like sick of looking at the thing. And for me, an important part of the process is the resting process. So while it's out with beta readers, I do not look at it. I do like what Annie does. I do a lot of reading and then kind of look at other books, maybe similar, that I can take notes from for when I get the changes back. So when I get the beta reader changes back, there's always a moment when you get feedback and I look at it, I read through it, I swear at it, say they don't know what they're talking about. The novel is perfect. Then I let it sit overnight and think about it a little bit. When I come back, I realize like 90% of what they said is spot on and I need to change it. That happens every time and I know it too. So just when you get first feedback, like don't react to it immediately, sit on it for a little bit. I've also learned to recognize that certain beta readers I have add a certain thing to my work. My agent is incredible at world building. So whatever she says about world building, I just take it. And I had a friend that she would always call me on my descriptions, which I know I need help with. And, you know, catch me when my description didn't match the emotion of the scene. Like it's a happy scene. You want like a bright yellow room and sunshine. It's a sad scene. You know, maybe you have some wilting flowers in the corner and it's raining outside. So take note of what each reader can add to, you know, and some of them, you know, I might disagree with her world building, but I always took her description. So after all that, for this book, after my agent went through it, we worked on it for a while and then we sent it out on our first round of submissions. And it was set in space at first. It was Labors of Hercules in space. And we got a lot of pushback on it being in space. So we decided together to make it fantasy instead. Which, you know, ship and ship are the same, so I didn't have to rewrite the whole thing. There was that. I turned all the separate planets into separate islands. But that was a pretty major rewrite during the middle of submission process. And then that fantasy version is the version that eventually sold. And then after you saw the book, I had 3 rounds of edits with the editor. So if you've just finished your nano novel, be prepared that the end product. I started with Labors of Hercules in Space with one narrator, and it became 3 narrators set in fantasy. And I changed quite a bit of it. So important in editing process is don't be married to everything. You're gonna have to make changes if you want to go like the traditional publishing route. And if you don't, like, maybe self-publishing would be better for you, you know, that's always an option. So I'll end there and see the rest of your questions.
Thank you so much. It's just great to, I think we all probably fall into that camp of thinking, finish the draft, and we should take that moment to celebrate. I hope everyone is. But, you know, realizing that there is work to do ahead, and but these are great tools and advice. And I really appreciate how much you all focus on the revision process, and I was hearing kind of that defamiliarization tips for that you were offering us. And a lot of you were reading other books. I love that you're resting the manuscript, listening back and looking at it in different formats. Those are the things that I thought were really helpful. I had some general questions for you. Now I have a lot of specific things I want to ask you. I'm going to start with the general one. If each of you could think about, you know, the greatest challenge. I know we're asking you to talk about a long process of going from first draft to a published book. What's the greatest challenge you face in moving along that process? Maybe like a barrier or something that, you know, you learned through, or, you know, how did you kind of overcome that as well? There's something you could zero in on as a challenge.
We just simul-clucked, like.
Unlike the Animals was a difficult novel to edit because it was so focused on, like, I was so married in some ways to the plot of what happened. And it was, the novel is like, it's a lot of different, like, it's a novel about, it's narrated by people in a graveyard about a small town with a woman who has a slight magic power who's come home to take care of her dying father, who's just hallucinating animals, and the ghost of a real life naturalist. And there's also pieces of this real life naturalist writing. He lived with animals in his house. And so there's so many moving parts of this book. And I wanted to make it like a John Irving, like there's so many moving parts. You at first are just like, that's a fun thing to read. And then it actually turns out to be like an important part of the plot. So you know, you just kind of like slip it in there and then you use it like as a knife later. It's just, you think it's for the laugh, but it's actually part of the plot. So it was a difficult book to edit and a fun book to edit because of that. But then if someone pulled something out of it, who was, you know, my editor was like, okay, actually you should take, you know, this character out, and this thing is like too wacky, take that out. The whole book, it was a house of cards, fell apart. So this book was unlike Rabbit Cake. It was not that experience that I could take out. I did take out 3 characters of Rabbit Cake. And so there were times when my agent always calls it like breaking the book, and she says everyone's going to break their manuscript at some point. Like you just feel like, okay, I'm editing and I made it so much worse, and that can be very scary. But it actually is part of, I mean, from my experience and then what she says with her other clients is, at some point you do need to break it. And with Unlike the Animals, I had to break it many times because then I had to, you know, take the sweater apart and put it back together. So it was, we did push back publication because of that, because it took me a long time to fix things that it just was not a straightforward book to edit. So that this was a particularly, yeah, that was difficult.
I think the most challenging part of writing, it's not nothing in particular, was finding community and finding a place for myself within a working community of other writers who were all working deliberately with the intention to improve. It was something that I was so hard up for, and that I needed And I felt capable of doing the work, like showing up to my desk and doing the work. Like I was gonna do that no matter what. But then you have this body of work and you're like, what of it? Now what? And I was so starving for community, had a couple of false starts, a couple of like meetup writer groups that they just did not go well. I tried to like find community on social media, the like writers community thing. I know all that works really well for a lot of people. It didn't work for me. So when I was still not sure what I had, like I had a draft of something, I didn't know what it was. I was still like really shooting long shots in applications, and I was applying for opportunities and like residencies and grants. I had no business applying for them. But on paper, I was a good candidate. And so I was submitting those applications that require you to like have an artist statement, which was helpful in and of itself because it was helping me understand myself as a writer, as an artist, and how I wanted my work to live in the world, how I wanted to be of benefit. But it also, they wound up, I got a lot of rejections. Oh boy, howdy, did I get a lot of rejections, but I also got some opportunities, and they were places where I was able to, in really organic way, cultivate community, like sustainable roots of mutual support, care and concern, and also like feedback, critical feedback. And so much of like every crossroads that I've reached in my on my path as a writer, like capital W, like have involved opportunities of cultivating community, and always at like precisely the right time. And I could wax, sentimentally and be like, and I wouldn't have my agent, and I wouldn't have, but it's all true. And so I think to answer the question, it was cultivating community, but it's also like the hardest thing was the process of remembering that nobody can care about your work more than you. Nobody's going to, so nobody should. And in that capacity, that belief is like a little teeny tiny little flame that you need to keep nurturing, that will coax you forward, that will keep one foot in front of the other, because those little steps add up, and all of a sudden, wow, you were there and now you're here, but the whole stretch of road out ahead of you. And even if you can't see the road ahead, like you can get from Providence to LA with your headlights lighting up just like 20 yards ahead of you. You somehow get there. Now I am being sentimental. But yeah, no, cultivating community was the hardest part, in a way that felt good and true and authentic to me and my work. That was the hardest thing. But y'all are already have a leg out because here you are.
For me, like it's drafting. You said you don't like drafting. I don't like drafting. That's the hardest part for me. And I'm going to specifically say the middle, or as I've heard people call it, the muddle, because like I said, I plot a lot out, but I always know how it's going to start, how it's going to end, the magic, the world, basically what's going to happen. But when you get to the middle, you're like, well, this is boring. What's happening here? So one tip I have found that helps me, and I don't know if you've read anything by Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn particularly. If you haven't, I'm going to give spoilers. Sorry. But so the plot of the story of Mistborn is they're starting a revolution. They're building this army hiding out in the desert. And you're, as the reader, you're going along thinking, okay, they're going to build this army and they're going to go take over the city and they're going to win the revolution. Well, in the middle of the book, he has the entire army just get wiped out. So and now I sit and that, like, now you're like, well, now what's going to happen? There's no army. What are they going to do? And I was much more invested in that story now because I didn't know where it was going. So my advice is burn down the army. If you don't know, you're stuck in the middle, blow it all up. Like whatever plans you had that were going to happen, ruin it. it does really get you out of a bind, and it does require a lot of rethinking of how your novel's gonna work. But every time I've done that, I felt like it just gives this added level of surprise and engagement for the reader. Even though I notice I still get stuck in the middle every time, so, you know, I try to follow my own advice, but so if you're stuck in the middle, there is hope.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing challenges as well as that, those very specific advice, out of them. I want to circle back to actually what Courtney beat me to it. I did want to talk about community. So Courtney, you're exempt from this round of questions. Unless you want to add something. But Annie and Rachel, if you want to jump in with advice on kind of cultivating that community that I thought you described really well, Courtney, in terms of just, it does feel like sometimes the meaningful community for a writer is an organic thing. It's often difficult for us because we're introverted and we're tucked away in that desk. And part of this conversation is about, well, what happens when we emerge from that writing nook, right? And how do we, and that's, I feel like in this day, emergence is difficult for a lot of reasons. I'm not very well socialized right now after, holing away for a couple of years. So it's a challenge we think a lot about here at What You Write Club. How do we provide a space for that, for those relationships to happen, especially with the challenges of the pandemic? I'll take a second to plug the writing groups we do have going. If you want to jump in on one of those, Susanna can drop a link in the chat. We also have them listed on handouts for this for here. If you want to, try to find those partners or readers. But I'd love to hear from you all about how you found that community along the way and how it influenced your process.
My most important relationship, like creative relationship, is with the writer Tessa Fontaine, who is wrote The Electric Woman, which is a wonderful memoir. If you liked Cheryl Strayed's Wild, that's like another exceptional story. So what happened with her is we went to the same MFA program, but didn't know each other. We were different years and we're not really friends. But she asked me to blurb her book, to blurb The Electric Woman, which came out about a year after Rabbit Cake. And then she asked me to blurb it. It's an exceptional book. That's easy to do. And then she emailed me again and saying, okay, well, thanks for that favor. Also, I have another favor. Can you help me, give me advice on how to write a second book? I don't think we're swearing. So I won't say what I actually said, but I said, I don't blank know. And I instead said, but I saw this essay, and there's an essay, and you can Google, maybe just put it in the chat. Amy Bender, Oprah.com will come up with this essay that is called "The Best Way to Get Creative is to Make Some Rules." And the essay is about Amy Bender and a friend of hers, and they made a contract, which you can download from this Oprah.com essay, that is legalese. It's like, Annie Hartnett will write 2 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then every day you send an email to the person and you say done, and the person writes back check. So I said, but we could do this if you wanted to. Like, I don't know how to write a second book. I've been really struggling. I did have to, after you write a book, this is another hard thing. That's you have to recalibrate your relationship to writing, because then all of a sudden you have this private thing has become public. And that was, even though I had really the nicest possible experience you can have with a debut novel, it still was hard for me to think oh, this is what people think about me. How do I live up to that? And how do I, it's you have to recalibrate relationship. A lot of writers get depressed after publication, which is not what you think happens. Even the writers that are so successful. So Tessa and I did that, and the contract is the thing that has changed my creative life more than anything else. Tessa and I now do run accountability groups on Zoom that is based on this contract. So if that would be one thing that I could, if we wanted to do that, you do have to pay for that. But it's a gym membership, So we started that because it was, I've taught novel writing to many people in different outlets. And I do love teaching novel writing, and I, you know, a lot of novels have come out of classes I've taught, but I do think that there can be, in a traditional workshop, sometimes you get feedback before you're ready for feedback, and that can be confusing. And so writing the whole first draft by yourself would sometimes be the better way for people. For me, I don't like to workshop anything until I'm done with the first draft, because it's just even good feedback. If my agent, you know, gives me good feedback before I'm done with something, it can actually like mess me up more than I just have to be in my cave. So that's, and then we have a podcast too, Tessa and I. So like this whole thing has become like a big part of my life. So we have a podcast that it's about accountability, but it's also about parenting young children and writing. It's called Here to Save You. And we interview writers about, it is, you could listen to it and not be a parent, because it's just about like how you get the work done. But we did start it because I have a toddler and Tessa has a baby. So it's like, how do these accountability problems that we've had pre-existed children, so like children arrived and like didn't make it easier.
Yeah, I wish I had known about what cheer sooner. I found out about it after I was published, so that would have been great. But so I didn't go to college for writing. I have my degree in marketing, and then when I hit 30, I'd always wanted to write. I just didn't know what. So I read Twilight, and then I was like, oh, I can write a YA novel like this and make $1 bazillion. All right. So I started when I was 30. My first novel was pretty much Twilight fan fiction, and it did not go anywhere. So I think at that point I realized, okay, if I really want to take this, but I enjoyed like the process of writing the novel, so at least it brought me there. And I wanted to do more, so I realized I needed some community. So I signed up for the SCBWI. If you write any type of children's books up to YA, that's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So that's been a great way for me to find community that way. They even do meet and greets. Like I used to go to those monthly, so you can meet a lot of other local authors. Going to the conference, I go to that conference too, but there's plenty of other writers conferences, and I always meet a ton of people there in the hotel bar after. I call it networking. So I've actually met a lot of great local author friends from networking at the hotel bar. So if you have the opportunity to go to a conference, that's a great way to meet people. And then there was like this online group of 22 debuts once we all got our publishing contracts. And that's actually where I met Riss, and got connected with a lot of other groups. I wish there was something like that prior to getting published, because that's been like incredibly helpful to me. But yeah, I would say I had the same with you. I had some writers groups, and it's hard finding one that meshes well. You know, a lot of times like people don't have their materials ready, or the feedback isn't really, you know, on point. So it is really hard to find a writers group, but you know, I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah, for sure.
It does take, and you know, don't get disheartened if you don't find the right critique partners on your first shot, because it does take a while. And then you'll find your people. It's good.
Yeah, I feel like anything that is worthwhile can take time. And so thank you for sharing these tips. We'll get a link to the SCWB.
SCB, as I know.
We'll get a link
Society
in
of
the
Children
chat.
Writers and Illustrators.
Thank you, Susanna. And Annie, how do people find the accountability?
So you can just go to my website. It's anniehartnett.com, and there's Pattinson's workshop, so you can read about everything that we offer with those workshops. So it's like we have this is how I feel about writing in general, is you have to play a lot of different games with yourself to keep yourself into it. And that's what I think NaNoWriMo is great for. You know, it's kind of, it's a challenge, right? It's a short burst of time, or like Jamie Attenberg's 1,000 Words a Summer, like different ways. So Tessa and I come up with a lot of different games to keep people like working on their books instead of, putting writing on the back burner, which just happens to everybody. Life gets in the way and so the writing falls off, so.
1,000 words a summer, I totally forgot about that, that was so helpful for me. At a particular time where I was trying to get a submission lined up, it was so helpful, and now it's like a whole
She has a
thing,
book
but
coming out of it.
yeah, but it was so helpful. I don't know if you're familiar, the writer Jamie is she started just a hashtag. She was trying to kind of like light her own mojo and just was like kind of rallying the troops to write 1,000 words every single day I think it was 2 weeks initially, and then it came a newsletter. You could sign up for the newsletter. Every day was like a pep talk, and it was like food, and then
Good food.
right, yeah, no, I mean, it was nourishing, and then the next round, there was like authors that were offering their little like guest writing the newsletter, and it was really, really helpful. It was kind of like a gym workout, because it was like working out a particular muscle, and also it speaks to the effectiveness of just like writing the flabby first draft, like just get it out, and then go back in and find the story afterwards. But totally forget about that. So you just said that.
That's I think I have one more question for you, and then if you all want to cultivating those questions, online audience too. I hope this isn't too much of a downer question, but maybe you can pull us back up with your answers. Rejection has come up a little bit in our conversation, and also just kind of, I was really feeling, Rachel, you described that kind of like defensiveness that can come up when you do receive feedback on your first draft. So any tips or advice on kind of shoring up for rejection, or how you get through that personally? Any tactics?
Shoot or shoot. Shoot or shoot. That is my philosophy. It's just like, if you're getting rejection, you're in the game. And if you're not getting rejection, then you're probably not putting yourself out there. So rejection, like, it's inevitable. So like, it's almost not even worth thinking about, but because it's just part of the game. So it's and I think the more that you get rejected, the less it stings. So shoot a lot and then you get rejected. Yeah, so that's mine. Shoot or shoot.
There was an essay a couple years ago, and I don't remember, maybe it was like Lit Hub, I don't remember who wrote it, I don't remember where I saw it, but it was, aim for 100 rejections a year. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
Aim for 100 This is, I think, more for people that are submitting like short fiction, essays, poetry to different like lit mags and online lit mags. Aim for 100 a year, not necessarily because you're just like shoveling those no's, but it means that you're shooting your shot. And it's easy to compare yourself to social media. You're looking through that window, it seems like everyone's getting this, that, and the other thing. And yeah, sometimes there are people that are really having a good year, but the fact that they're getting different things, getting published in different outlets, getting different residencies or grants or whatever, it means that they're submitting for those. And there is merit to just working on the submission itself, working on your artist statement, working on your project description. It helps you kind of understand yourself in a way that can maybe crack open your project too. And you're shooting that shot, and it's like, and I don't mean this in the brutal, like, I'm a New Englander, so I have that way about me, but like, I don't mean it in a brutal way of just toughen up, but kind of like, yeah, like toughen up. Like, practice.
Yeah, unlike their publishing story, this isn't my first manuscript I wrote, in my second, my third, it's my 11th, my fourth agent. So I always say, I'm like, you think the villain's dead, and then they like come crawling out all crunchy and half dead, but they're still in there. That's me and my publishing process. So I faced a ton, and you get some highs and lows. I definitely had some lows. I had the worst one I had is I had an agent, and then we went on the first round, and then we got the feedback, and I spent 6 months rewriting it, sent it to her, and she's like, I don't want to represent this anymore. That took me a few months to kind of pick myself back up off, but I did, you know. I'm also kind of petty, so I'm like, I'll show them, I'll work harder, and I'll be a big success. Oh, no, yeah, vengeance is gonna make sure. But you know, whatever it takes to pick yourself up, you know, and after you have like a bad rejection, like, you know, something like I've been dumped by 2 agents. So that, you know, the more that I talk about it, the more I find out that it's not uncommon. So, you know, people are always like, yo, it's something to be ashamed of. No, it's pretty common. But yeah, if you just keep going, you know, hopefully you'll get there. I mean, I would have kept going like another 20 years, like, you know, Benjamin, whatever it finds to drive you, just do it. But don't feel bad. Like, I did have to take a couple months. I didn't write anything. I just was like, I'm done with this. And then, you know, the writer bug comes back and bites you when you get a new idea and you're back and fresh in the game. So, and you know, that also, like, you can't be married to, like, have new ideas. And then sometimes I think like, oh, I'm gonna run out of ideas. I actually keep like a notepad of ideas that I have at random times, and a lot of them are really bad. I have like I think I wrote down like a retelling of facts of life set in space or something. Like nobody steal that, makes money. Like the most ridiculous thing, but I leave. Like, if you have those ideas, just write them down. And then, you know, who knows? Maybe one day I'll figure out a plot for that facts of life retelling in space, and it'll be, you know, New York Times. Who knows? Just write it down and save it for later. You're not going to run out of ideas. You can get dumped and rejected a bunch of times, and people still want to read your work. In fact, my agent I have now, I had sent her a previous manuscript, and she had read it but rejected on it. And then I sent her, and she actually asked me why I sent her this one, like I would be bitter about her. And I was like, girl, if I was bitter about everyone rejecting me, I have no one to talk to. But I said, you know, you requested something before which says you like my writing, you like my ideas, that just wasn't the right fit on the manuscript. And she agreed, like, you know, this one was the fit for her. And like, I really love working with her. So I hopefully have found my forever match. But you know, if it doesn't work out, then any other thing about publishing, I'm sure you know, like editors and agents change all the time. There's new people in the game, there's people out of the game. So it's never like a pool that's used up.
I think we brought it around.
Something positive from crunching after villain to look at you now. So thank you. Thank you for answering my questions. I want to open it up now, and maybe we'll start with someone in person, and just for the folks online, drop your questions in the chat and Susanna will voice them for you. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, so you've all written multiple books, and I was wondering, I'm in the editing process of my first book, and I'm wondering if I should start writing on my second book, which I have an idea for, or if it's like better to kind of focus and just like wait through the whole process of that first book before kind of touching another story.
Can you tell us more about, like, did you just finish?
So it's with a couple of friends who are reading it, but I did like a couple edits of my own after the first manuscript. So
you're waiting for your friends to get
some of the friends are reading it now, yeah. So kind of like I'm done at downtime. I'm doing a lot of reading, but I was just thinking, like, should I start drafting my next story or like hold off on it?
So my advice is, so I had a professor who told me when I was in my MFA program, when I was writing Rabbit Cake, and I'd written half of it, or the 40,000 words, it was like a complete story, but it was like a short story, or short novella type. And he said to put Rabbit Cake aside for a couple weeks because he knew I was obsessed with it, and he knew that I was going to finish it someday. But he'd seen a lot of writers focus too much on their first book, and so then if that book didn't get published, you know, and the rejection is gonna, like, it gets rejected everywhere, dies in your arms. Sorry. That's so deep. Then he said to start something new so that you could prove to yourself that you have another idea. So I took that advice, and I wrote something, and then, this is not advice because I did that. And then put that aside for years. And then when I came back to it, I was no longer in love with that idea. So it was like dead to me, but I had committed to it. So I had like, it was just, so it's a hard question whether you start something that you can't commit to. Now I commit to one book and I will not stop until I finish that. But a lot of other writers, I think, could benefit from having 2 projects in the work. So I think it's figuring out what works for you. I feel like I have to take my novels all the way to, whether they get to publication even. I can't even work on them when I'm in when there's not even a lot of work to do, the copy edit stuff. So that's me right now, and I know there are some writers like that, but then a lot of other writers work on multiple things. So I think I would just say I'm not sure.
I mean, I similarly have kind of I work wholly on one thing at a time, but it seems like you move to a place where it's out there in the world. You're kind of like testing your legs. I have an obsessive kind of one-track mind, and yet at the same time, I think because of my history or my origin story or whatever, I have a looser approach to the page, to what shows up on a page, because before, maybe a couple of years ago, it was always just me in the page. It was always just me in the notebook. So if you are something's kind of calling to you, it kind of can't, test the waters, it's not and now this is the one, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not, maybe it's just sits in a file, a compact post file on your desktop, and maybe it languishes, or maybe it grows into something else. But but to Annie's point though, everyone also is different. I've never had to write anything I didn't want to write, which presented a problem with the whole getting your voice out there thing. But if something, is calling to you, get the first draft out. It doesn't have to be a novel. Maybe it's a scene. Maybe it's a short story. But whatever is kind of chatting to you, let it have its voice. And
it's never wasted either. I think actually that the project that I fell out of love with, that I blame because it got me stuck for years, but I did use some of it. There was an element that I used that is an important part of Unlikely. I just also had to be flexible and let that idea go. So
yeah.
So that's just part of the journey, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you that if inspiration is striking, I write a lot. I'll start something new in that resting period that I call, when you've got out to be reviews and you're not looking at it. And you know what, sometimes you do only get a scene through, and that kind of gets it out of your veins. And then when you get your feedback, you can go back to your other, your original project. And that scene might sit there for a while till you kind of get through your edits, but it's not wasted. You can come back to it.
I love a compost file, in a Word doc. That's just, yeah. Sometimes it's just, we're not swearing though. Sometimes it's just.
I don't know if there's a
but sometimes, sometimes it turns into nothing, and sometimes it becomes something else.
You've also already finished the first draft, which is why I want some more details, because there's a great essay called The Getaway Car by Annie Hartnett, and she has this really useful, which is about writing, it is about her writing her first novel, which she considered a getaway car from her life as a waitress. Worked out for her.
Yeah.
And she's she says that when she was writing that first novel and working on that first draft, she had a friend that she would call, and when she had a new idea, and her friend would say, go back to that novel you're working on, stop being distracted by the sexy new idea, because otherwise you're going to finish. She had a fellowship year, so she had a year just to work on a novel. She said, otherwise you're going to finish this year with 16 pieces of novels and you're gonna hate them all, like, you know, just as much as you hate the other ideas. So, but having finished a first draft are in a different place than just like, you know, new idea. Like it's like online dating. It's just too many options. It's never gonna settle down.
Great question. Thank you. Great answers. Let's go to our online audience, maybe. Susanna, do you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, so much love coming in for everyone. I showed up with a shoebox full of knives. It's okay to break the manuscript. Margaret says she took Annie's novel writing class and it was great for feedback and meeting other writers. Jay says, it's such a privilege to write. I sit and hang out with a bunch of characters I have complete control over for the first 100 pages, and then they become middle schoolers with their own minds and bring me around for the next 200 pages. And the question, I'm going to go for Madison's question, then we have another one after that. And Madison is mainly for Annie. You mentioned Unlikely Animals had a lot of characters and you had trouble developing them. I think that's the main problem with my current draft. Do you have any specific advice or strategies for working on character issues for a story with a lot of characters?
I give them all, like, make sure they all have a name, even if you don't list the name, a job, and then I write quirky books, so this, a name, a job, or like a, you know, they can be children, so, you know, but school would be their job. And then like a hobby and a quirk that is like sort of different from their hobby. So one of the characters who in Unlikely Animals doesn't get a lot of page time because she's missing the whole book, and she's been missing since before the main character returns. She's been like, there's just a slight mystery element in the book. Book is there's like a secret hunting park and an opioid crisis, and yeah, this book is always like so weird to describe because it's got a lot of things going on. So this character, I'm not able to describe her very much because she's not on the page in front of me. So I have a flashback. And once I described her as she was a high school basketball player, but she wore a ton of eyeliner and like would bark at people in the hallways. So I had this like two, like, you know, a high school basketball player with a goth look. Then she was able to be like a fully fleshed character. So when you don't have a lot of space to describe them, like, you know, what they look like, but give them like a hobby and a job with something unexpected, then can make them start to round themselves out. I think, but yeah, and that's for main characters too. It's just sort of like, okay, in what ways are they the person that you expect them to be, and then what are they into that is something that, you know, we are all like, you know, you are looking at me, you don't know me, you think things about me, but, you know, I'm an onion. And there are things that if we were to say, you'd be like, that surprises me so much that like you read like celebrity magazines every day. Or, you know, what, maybe you can tell that about me. I don't know. So it's something like that you can do with each character. And I do give my students the whole like, it's like a cruise questionnaire, the like, yeah. I do give them that, but don't really think you need to do that with every character, that you can just ask yourself these few questions of like, what's expected, and then give them something unexpected, and then they'll start to like flesh out.
Great answer. Anyone else want to weigh in on characters before we? No pressure. That was Amy's question. Do we want to go? Let's do an in-person question. We can fix it up if we have any. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Hi. Thank you very much. I have a question about self-care, which is probably best for a therapist, but I've got a bunch of authors here. I've been writing for a long time, and I find that I lose myself in it. And you know, usually like an overflow ashtray, an empty bottle of scotch, like that kind of like unhealthy sort of stereotypical writer. And as I get older, I've kind of phased out of that. But I'm curious what other writers do for self-care, because like now, you know, I make sure I eat, because I would go days without, and I make sure I go for a walk because I'd be in that cave, and you know, I join What Cheer, so I have some human beings around, so I don't feel so isolated. So I'm just curious, like, what you guys do when like it's that obsessive time and you're kind of in your zone and you're in the cave, and how do you reconnect to your humanity? I guess I know Simple questions, right?
Well, I'll answer one quickly on that. I was like you a lot, and I would drink and smoke while I was drafting when I kind of first started. So one thing I really enjoy doing is like going out to a cafe and writing with other people. And I know it seems weird, like we don't even talk to each other. Like every Friday I meet a friend and we go writing and we don't talk to each other, but they're there, and it just, I guess it helps keep me like a human being. We go to a restaurant, we order food, write, have coffee. If I have a question about something, I can ask her really quickly. And she actually follows the Pomodoro method. I don't know if you know what that is. So she taught to me like 30-minute breaks, 25 straight working, no talking, just focus on it. And then you take your 5 minutes to, that's when we'll go to the bathroom or look up something on our phone or have a quick conversation. So we'll do about like 4 rounds of that. And then, then we usually go to the hot club and we'll keep writing there, but you know, we're gonna have a little fun with the writing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've also written on a spike, so I get.
Oh, good. It is a great motivator.
I have that feral art monster way about me. I'm a sober person, so it's not necessarily just like having to do with like, it's almost like a covetous movement towards understanding, and I do get locked into that place, especially when I hit a particular place in the project, and it does take on that careening quality. I have that, you know, there is something to be said about, you know, energy, creative energy. It expands, it contracts. So when it's expanding, you want to get, well, again, it's good, because inevitably it's going to contract again. But one might make the argument that that's compulsive too, you know. So having eating, like setting my alarm to eat, to stop and eat and go for a walk is actually, it's super helpful. But in the same way that I protect my writing time when maybe I am in a contracting place, you know, I protect it like I would protect a therapy appointment or a coffee date, whatever, some sort of commitment, protect that time. I also, when I'm in a more expansive period, I honor that time as opposed to protecting it, meaning like I clock out, because especially because I think maybe the subject matter that I kind of inhabit when I'm writing, and cutting along a nerve really closely, it can sometimes get to the point where I'm holding my hand over the flame just to see how much I can take. This is a personal problem. I farm it out to my therapist often. But this is also too, you know, reflecting on the fact that my relationship with the page is an extension of my mental well-being. I write about mental illness. I'm still mentally ill. Like I write about recovery. I'm still in recovery. You know, those things are perpetually moving. I didn't solve anything by being on the other side of it. And so sometimes I have to remember that there is no there, you know, we're just kind of learning to look alongside these things. I don't know if that answered your question.
Very well.
I would say that just the only thing that I do is find someone in your life who has not read it, but is willing to talk to you about it. And so for me, it's like, because it's just painful living in two worlds at once, right? It's like the fictional world and then your real world, and that's why people like cope with, you know, with substances or like, because it's painful. And so I found that if you have a friend, or my husband doesn't read it, but I'm like, hey, listen, this is what's going on in the world. And just letting someone in a little bit, be like, what do you think about that? Do you think that's funny? That's always my first question. But just like someone who's, I call it bouncing the tennis ball off the wall. It's like they can't really respond. They haven't read it. And that actually is more useful to you in terms of your mental health, because like, get it to be a person who's either like a yes man or is like doesn't say anything, but like is willing to receive, not coming with their own opinions, because that's really not what you want. But just someone who's like, yes. And if you have a person in your life who's just willing to be like, so, you know, sometimes when I talk to you about a fictional world and you just support me, then that makes you feel less isolated and sort of, it could also be another writer who knows the world, but it doesn't have to be. My husband's a scientist, he's not a writer, so.
Thank you.
To our online audience, Susanna, do you have another question from them?
Yeah, we have a couple.
Okay.
So Michelle wants to know, have any of the writers dealt with bouncing back and forth in time in their books? If so, any tips about making that work, anything to make sure to avoid?
That was a big question.
I haven't, so I'm like running through, I'm gonna think of an example, because I feel like I recently read a book that does this, that does it.
Tales from this person. Is it like 2 time periods, or are you just talking about flashbacks, or?
So it's,
Yeah, if you can write in the chat, I will.
okay.
There you go. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, well, I have experience with my second novel in particular, where there is a movement in time. There's a first person narrator that is reflecting in hindsight, not necessarily like flashback, but is, I mean, the entire novel is kind of like ruminative. So there are times where the movement between reflecting in hindsight and the present moment is a little more visceral. The helpful exercise for me was writing the past in the present tense as an exercise. And then going back and writing it in a past tense after the fact, to ground it with that same visceral quality. But again, to Annie's point, I don't, if.
She says, yes, that's it.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, for me, and again, I don't know if this is right, but it's just because I'm writing in a visceral way, writing things in the present tense first is very helpful. And then revising after the fact. It made like less of that whiplash that I was describing before, but still allowing for that reader experience of intrusive memory was important to that particular project. Does that make sense?
I thought of my example, so, The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell, I believe I just read. It's like a Victorian ghost story. If you like Blind Man, you love it. But that actually, so it starts in present tense and she's in a mental institution. And then it goes to past tense of her reliving. She's telling the therapist what happened to her to create, she ended up in a burned up mansion and she doesn't remember. So she's going back, reliving it. So it goes back to the past and tells in past tense the moments that led up to her being in this burned up mansion. And then there's a third in this scene, they find a diary of a previous woman who lived in this mansion. So it goes back like 200 years. So I thought that was like a really unique way of kind of telling this story in these 3 parts. And it worked really well if you need a good example for something like that, or a possible way to do it.
Cool, thank you. Maybe another online audience question.
So Jeffrey says, what advice would you give to an older writer who has a hard time getting references from professors trying to get into an MFA? What alternatives might this be?
Take a Grub Street class, especially now that they are back in person. Grub Street is in Boston. If you are, willing to, are they still teaching classes here?
Not at the moment, but maybe in the future.
Maybe in the future, I used to teach at Grub Street here. Me and Ethan tried to start at Providence Grub Street and we're getting going, and then, pandemic. It's stuff. Unfortunate. Or Catapult is also online. Although I think Grub Street, I don't know. I've taught at both places, but Grub Street would be my recommendation because you don't have to ask somebody who's like been a professor in a university capacity. They can be an instructor in a Grub Street. That's my answer.
Yeah, letters of recommendation, it's like my rant about that is endless. You beg for death. It initially was such a huge hurdle for me in applying for different opportunities. I remember having to ask an editor who published me at a lit mag for a letter of recommendation for a residency because I didn't have anybody. And I have my own hangups with like asking people for things, but I really, I felt like such a barrier to access, to not access like come one, come all, but even to applying it, like it, and in that application, in the guidelines specifying that, the work was what mattered, it's a blind read, it's this, that, or the other thing, and then still requiring for letters of recommendation to me felt like, what, but I feel for this person because that was a huge challenge for me. I don't have an answer.
I might come back to your advice about getting involved in a community, and that can look a lot of different ways. I know, like, even in my role here, I've written letters of recommendation for folks, and I've hopefully for some success, but like even just the more people that in the writing community, the more opportunities.
Because what an MFA program is looking for is assurance that you're not going to be a toxic workshop member. So that can come from a boss, but often they want, usually MFA programs ask like at least one of your recommenders should know your writing as well. So, but I think it's, from my experience, reading recommendation letters, you're looking for some red flags. And so you want to be, don't ask the famous writer that that is also like totally not like going to be reliable in terms of like who knows what she might say, because she's like, she has like her own, she might be a genius, but she's not like the reliable. Yes, this person is a wonderful like member of the community. That's what you're looking for. It's just so I think if you do take like, be in a community, if you can get into a community that's that you can be in Grub Street or but yeah, something like that will get you all the way.
How are we doing? Maybe one more audience in person, one more online question. Is after that? All right. Yeah. Oh no, we have two. Let's see what you can do.
I'm not totally sure how to formulate this as a question, but to Courtney, I guess, because you mentioned that some of your writing that you're thinking the short fiction was also kind of coming out of therapy. So I guess I was wondering if you could talk about like finding that separation between what feels sort of private and personal and what you're like the world needs to know.
I mean, I think that there's this kind of like idea, like online certain like ideas will come up every once in a while and people divide into camps, like writing isn't therapy, writing is therapy. But I've always had a way of moving towards understanding on the page that had nothing to do with whether or not I wanted my work to live in the world. That was like, like brushing my teeth. It's part of me. It's part of my life. It's part of my day. That doesn't mean that's all good, I'm oftentimes moving towards the door, like what I'm generating on the page is pointing me towards something else, some other sort of fascination. I think in terms of determining like what has, like what you were saying, like what people need to know, what they don't, I mean, that's like a personal sort of creative consideration. I would say though that above all, for me, the line is like whether or not it's rigorous, whether or not it's sometimes people talk about like confessional or whatever, it tends to be gendered when people talk about that, but it's whether or not it's rigorous and like moving in the direction of whatever you are trying to like establish on the page, whether it's theme, whether it's voice, whether it's cadence, writer consciousness. All of these things are kind of show up in my work. So it becomes, because of that, it becomes less about plot points and it becomes more about like the nature of a story told as a story. So I don't know if that makes any sense. I've never felt like I was, when I had a finished work, I never felt uncomfortable or embarrassed about what I was sharing. Because I had polished it to, I threw the rock into the rock tumbler. It had been brought to a high shine. First draft though was always like opening up my arms and bleeding on the page, but that doesn't make it good just because I'm bleeding. That doesn't make it good just because it's coming from like a source. It doesn't make it literature. I mean, like, I don't mean that in highbrow way, but it, yeah, like rigorousness. What makes something like a journal entry versus an essay? What makes something, you know, a journal entry versus a work of short fiction? And all of that kind of comes back to you. So I don't know that I have like a real answer. But if you just like show up for yourself on the page and like protect your writing time, inevitably you're going to move in the direction of something that opens the door to something else that has maybe like artful merit to it. Yeah. I apologize if I answered your question.
Thanks, Courtney. How's our chat?
We're quiet online, so.
Really? Oh. Okay, so maybe we can go right here.
Sure, I mean, it can even be like a really short yes or no. I'm just wondering, you're, like, when you query or were about to query for your first works, are you just sending out cold requests or introductions, or do you know people?
I queried cold rep. Did not want to ask anybody anything. It was the same thing as I didn't want to ask people to read my stuff. I did know some writers from grocery. I took classes there, and I know my MFA professors pretty much were not agented. So there were people I probably should and could have asked about, you know, do you like your agent? It's awkward to ask for referrals, but like you can ask, like, do you like your agent? And sometimes the writer will say like, oh yeah, and you know, if I know you're writing, I'll be like, you should email her with my name, you know, because that can help. But for me, I didn't do any of that. It just cold.
Yeah, because I didn't wind up querying, it was a different situation. But again, though, I was laying the tracks too. I was preparing myself. I had my list. So I think in that capacity, I would say like, yeah, I was going in cold, but also bearing in mind too that my work was not going to somehow be the exception to like not listen to the guidelines. A lot of the agents that I was looking up and looking into, they had very specific guidelines on their websites, and yeah, I follow them. Like follow the guidelines. And if you are into a particular writer that they're representing, mention it for sure, and mention that what you like about that work.
Yeah, cold query a lot. As you know, I've been plucked from this lifetime 4 times. So I recently posted my first query letter online as like a joke because it was so bad. It was like everything, I like pointed out everything that was wrong with it. So I didn't know anyone. I didn't have, every time I just went out there, you know, obviously the more queries I wrote, the better I got at it. But I did get my first agent off my second book and second like round of querying. So yeah, you don't really need to know anyone. I'm sure sometimes it makes it easier. I can give you my card too if you get, because my agent now, when they ask, like, can we talk to a client, she sends them to me because she knows I talk trash about other agents. Like, I give them I'm like, when you're on your call with other people, these are the questions you should be asking, because I had so many failures with agents. I just think I like people to know what you're getting into when you get that call. So I have like a long list of questions you should ask, and some of them are like, everyone wants to know. Because this is the first agent I went on a second round of submissions for. So I always ask, like, can you guarantee 2 rounds of submissions? And can you give me like a number of editors we'll send it to? Or what happens if that first round doesn't pan through? Do we do edits and go back? And definitely ask for a list of clients that they have. And someone said ask for people who've sold and who haven't sold, and how you feel that the treatment was. I mean, and not to deter anyone from taking an agent that maybe doesn't go on 2 rounds of submissions, because some agents really like, they want to get you the big deal. So I asked that too, like, are you willing to go to smaller houses? Are you only going to the big houses? And that's a decision you need to make for yourself too. I was definitely willing to go to a smaller house. Flux is an independent publisher, but I actually like working with them. I feel like I get a lot of connection with them. So that's a choice you and your agent should make before you even sign with them. Because if you're only out there for the 6-figure deal, then a lot of agents are right there with you. So you can do that, but they might ask you to either pass on the work, or they'll pass on you as a client if you don't end up selling.
Thank you.
Another thing somebody had said to me prior to me securing representation was, I think there's like this idea, because there is a lot of rejection and querying, and in terms of like online chatter, it can just be about like, shoveling those no's in the slush pile, as if like agents are, some gatekeeper or like pillar of power. And I think, yeah, there's like a little bit of that, but agents also need writers. And I think that's important to remember, that, and so in terms of like choosing maybe who your first picks are and whatnot, for me, it was really important to have somebody that like got not just my work, but got me and my weird bit of a head case. And that was really important too. So.
Thank you, such great agent advice. Any last burning questions? I don't want to cut anyone off. Okay, let me just make sure someone who hasn't. Okay, go ahead.
I'm curious what you guys do about social media, because there's so many choices. There's so many. Do you have like a central website, and then you do kind of like Instagram or whatever on the side? Do you avoid it like plague, or does it help you? Does it hurt you?
I can start if you want.
Yeah.
So I told you my degrees in marketing, my day jobs in marketing. I did website coding. I love the social media. Like, I'm shocked I'm not actually recording this for TikTok right now. I probably will take screenshots and do it. I like doing it. I like doing TikTok. I like doing Instagram. I was pretty active on Twitter, but with the whole Elon Musk takeover, I might move away from that. I'm kind of hanging on to it now. But if you're not enjoying it, don't feel forced to do it. I do enjoy it. I like coming up with content. But the other problem with that is, like, to stay active on TikTok, you need to do a video a day, and that's a lot. And you know what? I'm definitely not writing as much as I should be. If you want to do TikTok, my one piece of advice is, and this is like, because I'm old and lazy too, I have like content creation days, and that's the day like I washed my hair and did my makeup, and I literally like change shirts so it looks like I'm wearing a different shirt, and I shoot like 10 videos all in one day and then just post one each day to keep on the algorithm. That's my one TikTok tip. Wow. It's okay. I'm like the odd duck that
I don't tweet. I used to be like active on Twitter, basically sending out my like puns into the anonymous board. But I definitely got a lot of pressure to tweet, and it became a point in like the negotiation. Like, forever emphasizing with my agent, I'm not going to be active on Twitter. I'll go on and retweet stuff, but I'm not going to be like, because it just makes me feel bad. And so it's like establishing that what I was and was not comfortable with right out the gate was very important, because I didn't want to do anything that would compromise my way of relating to blank page my way of relating to my work because of the personal reasons that I was describing before, of like, you know, mental well-being and stuff. So I said to my publisher that I will do one channel and I will like commit to it. This will be my one thing. And for me, that's Instagram. I enjoy visual art. I enjoy photography. I feel like I can express myself in a way that doesn't make me want to die. That was very helpful. I don't quite feel like a shill. I probably could be doing more, but I think part of being a debut author is always feeling like you could be doing more, like, you know. So I'm doing it in a way that is engaging with the kind of cult of personality, but in a way that at least is like a passable version of me, the public face of my writer self. But finding one channel that I could really commit to, that was it. I kind of, because also like, if you do something and you're just kind of phoning it in, like you're writing a check you can't cash, you know, people can smell that from a million miles away. And so you're wasting your time, you're wasting your, you know, so why not just, if you can, figure out one like channel or mode or medium or whatever that like you can get a modicum of enjoyment from, that you can express yourself in a way that feels, okay, this is the ick factor is relatively low here. Starting statement.
Well, I know, it's such a, until recently loved Twitter and big part of my social network, really. And I had like, especially, you know, when I was editing the book with a new baby in the pandemic, in the early days of the pandemic, like Twitter was a real lifeline, and I really made a lot of friends who were writers and parents, and that really kept me afloat. So I'm like very like emotional about what is happening with Twitter now, because it really helped me in terms of community. And I also just love Twitter. I love, you know, telling stupid jokes. That's like where I live. I have an Instagram. I use Instagram more as a photo diary of what's going on. So sometimes it's related to book stuff. You know, if I'm really proud of something, I will post there's, you know, like a New York Times review or something like that's, I'm gonna put that in my square forever, you know, or but mostly it's my daughter on Instagram, and I don't like Instagram stories because I'm like, we should not always be on television all the time. So I don't really do it. I'll repost, but yeah, it's just and Twitter now. I'm definitely using Twitter less, and I'm not looking for a replacement to Twitter because it is also so addicting. So I don't want to get addicted to something new. I did log on to TikTok because, you know, my publicist is like, you know, TikTok is what sells books. She did not tell me to learn it. She did not she did not push it at all. But I created an account just to see what was going on there, and I was like, not ready for it. So yeah, I'm there, but I'm not there. So I'm not. But please, TikTokers, like, post my book and.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I feel like we've taken this from first drafts through revisions, agents, editing, all the way to publicity now. So it's all a part of the process. It's all part of kind of coming up for air, and hopefully finding other writers to come alongside you in that process. And also taking that moment again to congratulate yourself for where you are in the process right now. But I want to say huge thank you to our panelists today, Amy, Courtney, and Rachel. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing from your experience. It means a lot because of, you know, what we do see on social media. It doesn't always reflect the reality of the process, and so it's great to hear from you. Go out there into your independent bookstore, find their books, purchase them, read them, and we'd also love again to get your feedback on today's event. Listen to that link, we'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you for joining us online. Thank you for being here in person and for being patient with us as we figured out this hybrid stuff. Hopefully we'll do it again in the future. Yeah, we'll say goodbye to our online folks, and I'm sure we'll stick around for a few more minutes here for anyone else who wants to say hi. Thank you all.
Thank you.